Prof Semmalar Selvi.
Good afternoon, everyone present here. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for that introductory note. Um, as it was stated that I will be talking about COVID and caste, I will just check if my presentation is visible. Just a minute. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. So people might be wondering, like, no, what is the point of talking about COVID and caste? I mean, generally people think like, no, COVID 19 or this coronavirus, like, no, affects everybody irrespective of the caste. So that's what everybody thinks. But as we all know, we are working in this social sector. Like, we know there are vulnerable and marginalized group who are usually affected in any type of disaster, any pandemic or any disease because of their existing state of marginalization. So uh, just to like no start with the introduction, like no, you must have heard like in the early phases of um, COVID and lockdown and all these like no COVID protocols that they were following. Even the government gave a lot of instructions at that time. Like no, the term which was very very commonly used was social distancing. Like no, people started telling you have to be very conscious and then you have to do social practice social distancing. So there are a lot of people who have written about it. Like off late, like people started using the term. They said like no, you cannot use the term social distancing. Rather, you should use the term physical distancing and all. So, but in India, like no, social distancing has different connotation, as we all know. So this actually social distancing involves and mirrors distinct caste hierarchies. Like no, the whole caste system really talks about like no how I mean the whole system discriminates one group of people from the other group of people. It does not allow anybody to get along or like no socialize or eat together or hang out together. So the caste hierarchy also talks about it. And we all know social distancing has been part of the Savarna social and cultural life. We cannot separate this because, I mean, people might be thinking like, no, after so many years, like, no, do we really need to talk about this caste and hierarchy and social distancing and all? But maybe as I just go through with my presentation, you yourself can make or relate how it is so relevant even in the present context. Some people really argue that caste is immaterial. We don't have to really talk about caste. But especially in this pandemic, in this COVID situation, how these realities of caste has really deepened and then how it has really perpetuated exclusion will be very, very obvious. So the term social distancing further reinforced the caste exclusion and atrocities against Dalits during the pandemic. We have records like a number of people have done a lot of researches, and especially people who have been engaged in the field of monitoring violations and atrocities against caste-based violation and atrocities against Dalits and tribals have documented so well, like you know what was happening during the lockdown or in this entire phase of this pandemic. So I very strongly feel like this not only the terminology, But the whole concept or the philosophy behind distancing has really perpetuated a lot of violence also against Dalits, the so-called ex-untouchables. So that idea of purity and pollution are central to Varna system and caste system. Hence, most of the Indian elite upper caste could relate social distancing with untouchability. This is very, very serious, this thing. I don't know how many of you were aware, like even in social media, like, no, lot of people started telling, like, we already had the culture of this untouchability or maintaining distance. We already had the idea of like purity and pollution. So it is pretty easy for Indians to relate with what is social distancing and all. We might think like it's just an Insta page or a social media, but we really need to think very seriously. Like, no, it's not just a term, but people really wanted to reinvent or like really wanted to retain their idea of purity and pollution when they really talk about this COVID and social distancing. So apart from it, like, no, this IDSN is International Dalit Solidarity Network. So this International Dalit Solidarity Network already came up with certain factors where, like, no, already Dalits are targets of caste-based violence and all sorts of exclusion. So these 8 factors like will give an overview, like, you know, why we have to really talk about the untouchables or marginalized or tribal communities. But the International Dalit Solidarity Network has really listed down these factors which makes Dalits particularly a high risk group. And I will just narrate those 8 points. Dalit communities often live in segregated areas that are neglected and under prioritized in the past. It has been documented that awareness raising, health outreach, and relief have not reached these areas. I'm sure, like, you all will be aware, like, no, Dalits live outside the so-called main village. So this is so prominent. This is so common all across India. So people use the terminology also main village, which means like all the, Savarna you can call, or people who have really accepted the caste system, they reside in the village where they really call it as village. And all the Dalits or untouchables or like, you know, people, constitutionally we call as scheduled caste, they live outside the main village, which is like, no, usually a dry land or which is really far away from all the access to resources. It could be water, it could be land or whatever. So this kind of like, no, physical distance or the geographical position of Dalits, the outcasts, the untouchables, has really already made them to be neglected for whatever is coming. Even with my experience, I was working during this disaster, during the tsunami and all. Of course, like a pandemic, like COVID, tsunami also affected everybody. But then, like, you know, when the relief or rehabilitation measure, which was proposed by the government, just because Dalits were like, no, outcasts, they were residing outside the village, they were neglected in terms of getting all these benefits. And sometimes consciously, the dominant communities which were residing in the village prevented these people getting all these relief and rehabilitation. This is applicable even in this pandemic situation also. So their physical positioning also matters in terms of having access to uh, any relief or rehabilitative measures. So the second point is Dalits often do not have access to clean water or sanitation facilities in their homes. This is also again basically because like Dalits live outside the resourceful places. It could be water resource or any sort of resource. And even in urban communities, like, you know, the migrant population who usually live, the urban poor that we call. So the statistics really talks about like urban poor constitute mostly Dalits or other backward communities. So, you know, like the habitation, how people live and the sanitation facilities. So that is also contributing for them to become a high risk group. Many Dalits live in crowded spaces with whole families sharing 1 or 2 rooms. Again, this is a very, very risky factor where if one people are getting affected, one person in the family is getting affected, they don't have the like, no, luxury or the privilege to have do a isolation, even a home isolation, to have a separate toilet or a separate room or something like that. So this is also contributing that they are in a high risk group. They were in a high risk group, making physical distancing and isolation impossible within their living spaces. So due to their congested living spaces. Dalits make up a large section of workers in the unorganized sector on short-term contracts as daily laborers, home-based workers, or modern slaves. This means, again, like when we talk about slavery, again, the statistics says, like, no, people who are into bonded labor predominantly are from SC and STs. Even in Tamil Nadu, if you see, scheduled tribes are mostly into this bonded labor. So this means they may lose their income and means of feeding their families from one day to another due to measures put up in the place curb the spread of COVID. This is like lockdown. You can just really think, imagine like no, like a daily wage laborer survives on the wages that he or she gets. If a daily wage laborer does not get a job on that particular day, they cannot really meet up even their basic food requirements also. So when you just put Dalits under a high risk group, we don't talk only about like how the disease is spread, how they are vulnerable for spread of disease. Rather, this is an indirect impact that they have on the livelihood, where we call Dalits are in high risk groups in terms of exclusion. So discrimination in accessing healthcare facilities for Dalits due to social stigma and untouchability is well documented, and Dalits risk being left behind or treated last. Even beyond COVID situation, like you can just access to a lot of news items. Like you can just Google and find out. Historically, we could see the access to healthcare facilities have been denied for Dalits predominantly. This is even contributing to the high infant mortality rate, even malnutrition among the adolescent Dalit girls. So this has been there for a long time, but especially when it comes to this kind of stigma of COVID and other things, like there are high risk that Dalits would not be would not have access to healthcare facilities. It could be even private or public. If you just really talk about the public healthcare facilities, of course, due to the remoteness or due to other factors, like they may not, even due to discrimination or stigma, they may not have access to healthcare. Apart from it, as we all know, like during this of course, our public health structure was like little okay that at least in Tamil Nadu, we had hospitals, and of course, we had scarcity of oxygen supply and all. So even a few of my own like known contacts who were suffering to get hospital beds and all, as we all know. Just imagine like people who are living in poverty predominantly does not have any opportunity to have access to private healthcare facility. So again, the factor of class and caste, which is intersecting, that they cannot have access to healthcare facilities. So Dalits suffer significantly high rates of malnutrition and poverty, as I already stated, and therefore often have a weakened immune system. So this is even applicable for the people who are into sanitation workers. So the second part of my presentation, I'm also covering like how it is affecting the sanitation workers also. So as poverty is a cycle, and again, health is also depending on the cycle, like how nutritious food that you take. So your immunity also depends on that. So this is also another risk factor where like the condition where Dalits fall into the risk category. Furthermore, higher mortality and lower rates of literacy are widespread among these communities. Again, initially, we do not have much awareness about COVID and how you have to really safeguard yourself and all. So the literacy rate also plays a very vital role. So Dalits make up the vast majority of India's sanitation workers. As I already told you, like I will also be dealing with sanitation workers because the statistics also shows like predominantly sanitation workers are from the SC and ST categories. So India's including as manual scavengers, removing human excrement or cleaning sewers without proper protection gear. So as I will be dealing in detail, I'm just skipping this point. The intersectional caste and gender discrimination means that Dalit women are at particular risk. As we all know, we also have to look into the intersectionality. We cannot just look Dalit men alone. When we really talk about Dalits, we have to really have to give special attention, like how it is affecting the lives of Dalit women, especially when we talk about manual scavenging or the sanitation work. Most of the Dalit women are engaged in such work. So coming to the point of social exclusion, discrimination, and atrocities, as we all know, the statistics also talks about like the National Crime Records Bureau says like the atrocities against Dalits have increased compared to the 2019 and 2020 in spite of lockdown. So I'm just giving a glimpse of what is the pattern of exclusion or discrimination which has happened during the lockdown or during the phase of COVID and the pandemic. So one example is in Uttar Pradesh, in Kushinagar district, a man in coronavirus quarantine center refused to eat food cooked by a Dalit. So this came up in news also. You can just go reference. In spite of he being there in a quarantine center, so he just broke this quarantine norm and then he went back. Actually, that's what the news says. But still, he doesn't wanted to eat a food which is being cooked or served by a Dalit. So we are living in 2022. Still, we are talking about like, no, this is a very, very explicit outward form of untouchability that he doesn't want to consume the food cooked by a Dalit. Again, like in Tamil Nadu, we just say that like, no, social exclusion. I mean, Tamil Nadu is a very, very progressive state, like, no, Dravidian soil, and then we are so progressive. Still here, like even in this lockdown, like, you know, we see a lot of honor killings also in Tamil Nadu, which is happening. So a Panchayat president in Tiruvannamalai district belonging to Irular community was forced to dig a grave, which means something to do a menial job, like no digging a grave, the cremation work, everything was disposed to these marginalized communities. So this man was forced by the members of dominant community in spite of he being a Panchayat president. So even though he attained, democratically elected Panchayat president, he was forced to dig a grave. So you should imagine now, like at least the COVID and Omicron, they have really normalized. Just imagine at that point, like when everybody, even they were not giving dead bodies to home, they were not handing over if people are dying out of COVID positive. So he was forced. Again, we could see the intersection of caste, like, no, people are meant to do this work, are forced by the Hindu dominant community group to do this menial work. So in Palwal district of Haryana, a Dalit family was attacked and the accused used caste slurs for not switching off the lights as suggested by Prime Minister. You all know, like there was a phase, like no, there was instruction that you have to switch off your light and then light candle and all. So again, you could see even a small gesture. We do not know what is the condition, but the victim family says like we followed the procedure which was stated by Prime Minister, but then the attitude of discrimination, the attitude of like no somebody being superior and the outcast being inferior. People inflict even violence for small little things, like no, they take up the authority. They wanted to attack, like no, the story says like no, the attacker went inside the Dalit family and then attacked the entire family members for this particular incident in this particular incident. Again, in Rajasthan, in Jaisinghpura district, a man was beaten up for opening an essential item shop while his shop had a picture of Dr. Ambedkar. So you could see like Ambedkar is always related as an icon only for Dalits actually. But if you really see, there are two dimensions to it. One is like, no, there was lockdown and other things, essential shops were allowed to kept open. But then again, the idea of like, no, I have all authority over the body of Dalits. So that you can really connect with how Dalit women are gang raped or raped. The dominant communities, so the upper caste, always have authority over the body of Dalits and especially Dalit women. So an ordinary person who's just a local villager is taking authority and then beating up somebody else. What really triggers him to beat this particular person, and what is the reason for us? Like, no, immediately when they see Ambedkar's photo, he is able to make a connection that he's from an untouchable community or he's a Dalit or scheduled caste. So it's a very, very unfortunate state, like, you know, that we equate Ambedkar with this. Like, if you just read the writings of Ambedkar had wrote extensively about anything, like, you know, the economics, the nationalization of land, and then even in the labor sector, even for bringing a lot of women's rights and acts and all. But we limit and then see Ambedkar as icon only for the untouchable community. So, as I already stated, like crimes against Dalits tribals increased in COVID pandemic. This has been stated in the site of National Crime Records Bureau. So, they have just drawn the statistic like this. A scheduled caste person faced crime every 10 minutes in India in the year 2020, accumulating to a total of 50,291 cases registered. So I just wanted to put forth this point also, like, no, when atrocity is happening, it's not always registered. So there are multiple reasons why the case is not registered actually. One is like, I'm just quoting the example of Tamil Nadu since I was also working in the field of human rights, Dalit human rights. When we go for fact finding, we know the truth. The Dalit victim would have been attacked by the dominant communities in that particular village. But always these dominant communities will have some nexus, some power relation with the local police station. Again, the inspector or the sub-inspector or whoever is coming for inquiry would also belong to the community of the perpetrators community. So the first thing, even though we have very, very strong act, which gives a very, very detailed protection for prevention of atrocities against SC and ST, in terms of even registering a case is a very, very challenging thing. So even this 50,000 number is just the case which is being registered. I have a very, very strong opinion. This could be even doubled because especially even in a normal situation, especially in the lockdown situation, you can imagine like even the news would not have been reported. Only when the news is reported, like no people like human rights defenders go and then they like no get the facts and then they help victim to file FIR and other stuff. But in spite of all these things, even the Crime Records Bureau states that 50,000 cases, odd cases have been registered, an increase of 9.4 percentage from the previous year. So another surprising thing is like no, most of the days of 2020 that we were in complete lockdown. So even in a complete lockdown situation where people were not meeting with each other, the rate of atrocities has increased so much. And according to the government data, we could see that. So crimes against scheduled tribe communities are also increased, has also increased by 9.3 percentage to a total of 800 odd cases in the year 2020. So out of which Uttar Pradesh reported highest number of atrocities against SCs and Madhya Pradesh reported the most number of crimes against STs. So this is the official data. Coming to the other part, like no, the plight of manual scavengers and sanitation workers. uh you might be thinking like no, manual scavengers and sanitation workers, like what is the connection of caste? So as I already pointed out, like no, the caste system really dictates the occupation also. Some people really say like no, caste system is just a division of labor. They defend caste system just by like no, telling it is a division of labor. If you could just read Annihilation of Caste written by Dr. Ambedkar, he refutes the fact that it is not division of labor, because if it is division of labor, you will have an opportunity to change your occupation. But where in caste system, you don't have any room to change your occupation actually. So again, people who are engaged in sanitation workers, the statistics says this is according to Union Social Justice and Empowerment Ministry. Like the minister responded to a question. So this data comes from that. Of the 58,098 people involved in manual scavenging who were surveyed, caste related data was also available. 43,797 people, of which 42,594, which is 97.25 percentage, belong to scheduled caste. So 421 to the scheduled tribes and 431 to other backward classes. So you could see none of the dominant communities or upper caste who are engaged in this manual scavenging or sanitation work. So as you all know, in this pandemic, like no, these people were predominantly like saving lives of many people in terms of cleaning, taking the garbage, and then maintaining the cities like no cleanliness and all. You can make a direct connection like no, who's part of this manual scavenging and sanitation work. So manual scavenging and cleaning of sewers and septic tank continues even though the direct handling of human excreta was banned in India. There are very strong act that we have, like even the Amendment Act, manual scavenging was banned under the provision of employment as manual scavengers and their rehabilitation. So I just wanted to put forth this information because not only in COVID, even before that, if you just take the data, lot of people are dying just being engaged in this sanitation work. One is like because of their exposure to direct exposure to the human excreta and all sorts of things. Though the Manual Scavenging Prohibition Act prohibits a lot of things, if you could just see like the normal example that we take, even in railway stations, the railway tracks, if you could see, the human excreta has been cleaned only by railway employees actually. Technically, they are government employees, but still They are not given any protective measures. Like even this whole system of cleaning should be banned. Even that is being practiced in the railway sector. Apart from it, if you could see, a lot of people are getting into this manhole, they call sewage tank, they call. Lot of death is happening even when they get into those tanks. Just wanted to quote one this thing. A bench headed by Justice Arun Mishra questioned Attorney General KK Venugopal, appearing for censure, why protective gear like mask and oxygen are not provided to these manual scavengers. My question is like, no, of course he's questioning like why they are not given protective mask and other oxygen, because people are dying when they get into this manhole due to this gas, they die. So he's questioning that. But my whole question is like, no one is questioning why a human being is sent to sewage tank. In fact, that hole is called manhole. That itself is wrong actually. But the entire society has no remorse or regret that we are all using human beings for such a dirty work. We as a larger society have to feel ashamed of continuing this practice even in this 2020, even in the century we are doing this. Another question which just comes to my mind is like, no, we have this rocket science. We want to go to Mars and we want to do all sorts of science and technology research and R&D and all sorts of things. But nobody wanted to invent a technology to save these lives or really look for a technological alternate for this allowing people to enter in this manhole. Of course, Delhi, Kerala, and other states, they have just experimented some models where they are using technology or robotic things to clean these sewage thing. But normally, in general, government does not really bother about it, and then this practice has not been prohibited in spite of we have a very strong act which prohibits this manual scavenging. So according to a report by the National Commission for Safai Karamcharis, a statutory body set up by an act of parliament for the welfare of sanitation workers, between 2015 and 19, one person died every 5 days on an average while manually cleaning sewers and septic tank across India. So even in a normal situation, if you could see that how much of direct exposure these manual scavengers and sanitation workers had during our COVID pandemic situation. So there are again multiple organizations have conducted research, like they have also raised questions in terms of providing them with the personal protective kit, hand gloves and masks and all. So one such similar study which was conducted of the 366 workers interviewed, only 33% were given hand gloves and masks. So the sanitation workers have revealed that they were given masks. I mean, they have given provided masks only for 33%. 2.73 were given hand gloves, which is very, very essential. You usually, like, during the first wave and second wave, the disease was spreading like anything. So people were getting into these work without any safety measures only. So there is also reference. You can just go look at the reference. So sanitation workers saw a 23% increase in their working hours with no increase in pay. Again, most of the, as I already pointed out, what was there in the International Dalit Solidarity Network high risk categories, these workers are usually working on a contractual basis. At least earlier sanitation workers, whoever is working in railways, will have the benefit of pension and other social, they are part of some social welfare net. But since all these workers category have been given to contract to private players, you can imagine, at least in government sector and a welfare state, we can question the government. But imagine, there is no increase in the pay. In fact, like if the same study also talked about like they did not get leave also, which means even if they had a very mild symptom, they did not have an opportunity to really take care of their health. So the lack of health benefits and potential of carrying an infection back home into closely packed colonies exacerbate the existing risk of infection. So as I already pointed out, like the Dalit hamlets or the people who do this manual scavenging and sanitation work does not have a very luxurious space where they can really distance themselves. This is also causing that they carry the infection to their family members also. So the challenging part of this whole manual scavenging and sanitation work, of course, in spite of so many human rights organizations which has worked, government is not willing to provide a consolidated data even on a general note, especially in this COVID situation. So there is no consolidated data which is available on the death of the sanitation workers. Hence, they are not eligible for compensation, insurance and other benefits due to their contractual nature of their job. So at least if they are not on contract, even the Tamil Nadu government announced if there is COVID related death, the compensation earlier, the previous government announced 50 lakhs. There are a lot of malpractices in terms of what data they provide. If they don't want to give compensation, they just report the death as like no heart attack or whatever. They don't report it as COVID death. That is on a general thing. Like it was so normal. But when it comes to sanitation workers, again they had the risk that their job nature is on contract, so they were facing very difficult even to get. The family members were not getting compensation. So that is to do with manual scavengers and sanitation workers. The next part is to do with migrant workers and COVID. Again, people might be thinking like, no, there are a lot of community of group of people are there in, are part of this migrant worker. But again, just wanted to quote a very recent study which was done by University of Hyderabad. The study found that a majority of workers in the state who migrated from Bihar and were displaced due to COVID-19 crisis belong to SC, ST and OBC communities. According to the study, 45% workers were from SC, ST community and 43% from OBC community. This was the study just picked up just during the COVID time. But even generally, if you see the statistics, people who migrate from different parts, especially like states like Bihar, even they come to Tamil Nadu, Kerala and Karnataka and all. So they are predominantly from this marginalized and vulnerable groups. So you know the plight of migrant workers, like no, just immediately, like without any previous announcement that the government made, like all of a sudden, the government gave only 4 to 5 hours. They said like no, there is a complete lockdown. So there were migrant workers who were walking. They wanted to get back to their village because they cannot meet the expenses. They lost job and everything. Migrant workers died walking miles to reach their native villages. And predominantly, as I stated, migrant workers come from these marginalized communities. So people have filed a petition and then dismissing a petition that asked that center to be ordered to provide food and water to migrants on the move. The Supreme Court said it is impossible for this court to monitor who's walking and not walking. Such a responsible response came from court. Adding to it, the Supreme Court also said sternly, let the state decide. Why should the court hear or decide? It is for the states to decide, said the Supreme Court. There are people walking and not stopping. How can we stop it? The judges said. So I feel very strongly that the migrant workers' condition was not at all attended by any state government or central government. That is the reason somebody filed a petition in Supreme Court, and the response is not so nice. Like no, even in a welfare state, in a democratic country, like no, government should really take responsibility. After that, like every state took some responsibility, and then they made some arrangement. But a lot of people died on the way. Like a lot of children also died on the way, walking to their native. So a few things that we saw was the direct impact of COVID, caste, and all sorts of exclusion and discrimination. This COVID lockdown and this whole pandemic also had a very, very serious impact on the livelihood of SC, ST communities. So the first primary most thing is like, no, there was abruptly people did not have any job or even a daily wage. Unemployment was a major problem, and dislocation of migrant workers and food insecurity. Especially people wanted to walk back to their own villages because they couldn't meet the expenses in the city where they were working. Most of them were in construction field, like no construction was totally stopped, so they lost job. Again, the second part is like, the fear among upper caste that the lower castes are carriers of the virus. This also we could very easily relate with, especially the domestic workers lost their job. Like, even in my own contact, a lot of people stopped, like, domestic workers coming and working in their home. For instance, where barred by gated communities, even after the lockdown was lifted. Even beyond the lockdown, like, they have to face a lot of challenges in terms of getting back their employment. So again, that is an indirect impact on their livelihood. According to a study conducted by Ashoka University, socially marginalized groups would be at the risk of mortality due to COVID, and the economic consequences would also have an impact. One is like they lost job. The other thing is like, the study also very clearly says due to the economic consequences, due to poverty, due to unemployment, not having adequate food, people might also die even beyond the coronavirus spread. So all caste groups lost jobs in the first month of the lockdown. The loss was the lowest for upper caste. So the study says very, very clearly the stigmatized caste groups, OBC, SC and ST, all lost significantly more compared to the upper caste. So 14%, the probability of job loss for SCs was 14 percentage points higher than that for upper caste. In other words, the rate of job loss was 3 times higher for scheduled caste communities. So they have the migrant workers also face the same issues, and even a non-migrant worker also had issues of livelihood challenges. So the other part is to do with educational inaccessibility. Again, we can call this as indirect impact on the lives of so many SC, ST students. On a general note, a total of 320 million learners in India have been adversely affected and transition to the e-learning industry, which comprises a network of 1.5 million schools. But the data says 32 million children were already out of school before the pandemic. So you could imagine already we were in a very, very challenging phase that not every children were enrolled in schools. So already we were living in this challenging situation. The majority of them belonging to the socially disadvantaged class in the country. Even the official data says, like, no, people from the marginalized communities are more prone to becoming a dropout. So in this context, in a recent, again, a survey, the Ministry of Rural Development found that only 47% of Indian households receive more than 12 hours of electricity. So imagine internet facility, and more than 36 of schools in India operate without electricity. So you could imagine even the schools operate without electricity. This is even before COVID. 2017-18 survey talks about it. Now, if you could just relate, it would have been a really challenging situation for students from the marginalized community due to this online switch over to the digital education or the online education. Students from underprivileged backgrounds are deprived due to online education, either because of the inaccessibility of the technology or low education of their parents to guide them through tech-savvy applications. Even our own students, where I teach in a college, when we switch over to some other from Google Meet to some other technology, they face difficult in terms of logging in during their exam. So I usually think, like, no, a city, a college which has been there for a long time, like, no, people who were studying in that college is finding so difficult. You could imagine, like, no, students studying from coming from remote places. So another educational in terms of dealing with this educational inaccessibility, Chennai school divides students into batches on caste lines. This is after, like, no, school started functioning on batches. Like, no, even the caste teacher or the principal wanted to really divide students in different batches because, again, the idea of purity and pollution, few group of people are considered to be carriers of the disease, though coronavirus deals everybody equally. Like, no, we presume and assume, like, no, some people are so prone to this disease. Then action was taken and this system was changed. Then the school HM was telling, no, we were just having the attendance registered for a different purpose. We didn't want to do this and all. But it's not even acceptable. So again, very direct impact, like, a class 10 student from Kerala, Malappuram district committed suicide as she was not able to attend online class. So parents could not afford to buy a smartphone. She got into depression, and again, she's a Dalit girl. So on a general note, this is one case. There are a number of cases that student committed suicide just because they cannot have access to internet facilities or smartphones. So parents also lost their jobs, and this is again a difficult situation because most of the Dalit parents are in unorganized sector. Unorganized sector was very badly hit post lockdown and during this pandemic. So they are not able to pay fees or meet other educational costs. This is also again an impact of inaccessibility. Um, Again, on the other end, like, dropout rates were increasing state-wise. There were a lot of studies which were conducted. Students started going for job discontinuing education to meet the livelihood challenges due to COVID. Again, due to digital divide, which has a major impact on SC/ST students, especially because they are coming from low income group, student could not apply for higher education. In fact, like application, like, applying for a college, or either prepare or apply for entrance exams like NEET. Especially these marginalized students just rely on the marks that they get from the school. They are not very used to this thing of, like, applying for this entrance, especially, like, appearing for the exam through online and all. So again, this is also creating a lot of this thing in terms contributing to the educational inaccessibility. So just wanted to conclude, for the people who think like, what is the role of caste? Caste plays a significant role in determining the magnitude of vulnerability, especially times like this COVID and this pandemic. So I strongly feel India's caste inequality has persisted and deepened in this pandemic. So um, it could be as the impact of lockdown, or it could be because of the disease. So I feel marginalized sections are more vulnerable, especially in such times. So thank you so much. Uh, I hope people could relate with whatever I was speaking. As instructor, I think I can just open the floor for questions or any observations or any remarks that they want to make, oppose, agree, whatever.
Thank you, ma'am. We will now be moving on to the Q&A session. Please remember to keep your questions straightforward and pointed. Each participant will be allowed one question. The speaker and the members of the organizing committee can choose to disallow any question at their discretion. We now open the floor for questions. Please raise hands and the members of our team will recognize you.
It could be even remarks, even if it is not a question, or add your comments also, so that I can understand, like, how we could really relate this concept.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, this topic was very relatable in terms of the real life anecdotes that you gave. So I really enjoyed the lecture, anecdotes, and it was something that we lived through and saw in the news every day. But it is still something that we can connect or not connect. You you know something is happening, but you still can't go on the roads and connect to it. And yeah, this was a really good lecture to listen to, and I hope uh, I I can work on a paper like this in the future.
Thanks, Sadhana. Thanks for that feedback. Anybody else? So I just want to know, like, the participants, have you read anything related to us, like, especially in terms of COVID and this pandemic before, written by any other author? You can also draw insights from that. Okay, then if there are no questions, like, no, I think we can move on.
That brings an end to the keynote lecture series. We are extremely grateful to Professor Semmalar Selvi for her gracious presence and insightful talk this afternoon. We hope to host you in the future editions of the conference as well, ma'am. The next panel, titled Contagion and Misinformation, moderated by Professor Kalpana, will begin shortly at 3 p.m. Kindly stay with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.